With us right now is Robert Den Ouden. Robert, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. You're an author. You have written a book about poverty, and you talk about generational poverty in America and situational poverty and what to do about it. So we'll talk a little bit about the book here just ahead. Right now, just give us an idea. Tell us a little bit about Robert Den Ouden.
Well, I started out back in 1972 as an educator and a coach. After 8 years, I decided that I was smart enough to start my own business. Started a small sporting goods and trophy shop. 4 years later, I figured out I wasn't too smart, and that was probably the best education I've ever been through. Then I had to have a job, so I went to work at Mead School and Office Products in management. Was there for 10 years until they went through a bunch of reorganization, offered me an enhanced severance package. I decided to move on and educated myself in investments. Started my own investment advisor business back in 1994. Ran that for 21 years and then sold my business and retired. And then spent the last 2 years finishing this book. I had researched it for 10 years prior to that, but with running my own business, I had a bunch of papers and nothing organized. So that brings me to the book. I believe it's past time for me to give back. And the majority of the profits from the sale of this book go to poverty. So poverty initiatives in our area.
So talk about that. Talk about the basic premise of the book. You're looking for solutions other than a government solution to ending poverty.
Yes. Back in Lyndon Johnson's era, we started the Great Society. And again, I always say that most people's intentions are good. They truly want to do something. The problem is you can't spend your way out of poverty. You can't start a program. You can't spend more money and just expect poverty to go away. My premise is in generational poverty is a prison of the mind. So it's think, feel, act. How people think determines how they feel, determines how they're going to act. And so unless you can change thought, you will never do much to reduce generational poverty. So it doesn't make any difference how much money you spend, how many programs you have. There are over 80 federal means-tested poverty programs in this country. And yet generational poverty is still large. In fact, it's basically unchanged in the 60 years.
So what is it about the thought process that traps people into generational poverty?
I can't do it. This is who I am. You can't do it. Also, the thought that starts that I'm entitled to, that I'm entitled to food, housing, clothing, shelter, medical, and though we need to try to help provide that basic, and as a Christian, I believe no matter what, we need to take care of the basics. But truly, to get out of poverty, you have to get people to think that they can, not they can't. And that's what our government has pushed down and enabled people to feel like, well, this is just the way it is. So you have to change that philosophy. You have to change education. And again, I say in my book, I anger a lot of people because I step on toes. I was a teacher. But if we're really going to change generational poverty in the future, we have to teach children differently. And we have to incorporate that attitude, habit, philosophy within the structure of the curriculum. And it can be done.
Are you saying that government enhances or at least prolongs generational poverty?
Amen. Yes. There's no question. And my solution, again, which upsets some people, is I believe capitalism is the answer, not the cause of generational poverty. It's the capitalist heart that can be a problem, but it's the only thing that can give people opportunity to get out of poverty. And the bigger our government gets, the more power is there, the more problems you have. And I forget who the person who said that capitalism is the worst economic system in the world except all the others. And that's true if you really look at all the other socialism, fascism, whatever. They may have a nice deal of taking care of everybody, but you get fewer people at the top, more people at the bottom under the control. So,
as a side note, does it distress you that so many young people seem to be ready to embrace socialism?
Yeah, a lot. Distresses me a lot. And I think a lot of it is they truly don't understand it. They hear the philosophy of taking care of everybody, but they don't understand what that truly means. And so history, they need to go back and study history and look at socialist governments around the world and just see what happened. So.
You'd mentioned, just to go back to generational poverty, and how government is actually perpetuating generational poverty. Is part of that political in the sense of creating a dependent class?
Well, again, I think so in some cases. I don't think initially that's the intent, but again, the longer, we have politicians for life there. So they're dependent on people depending on them, so keep voting them in. Whether it's intentional or subconscious or whatever, but definitely that's what's happening. And yeah, they need a dependent populace to keep them in control.
You make a distinction between generational poverty and situational poverty. Tell us about that.
Well, generation is just what it says, generation after generation. You just one family and their children and then their children. That's generational. Situation is something happens in your life that you lose a job and you have no savings and now you're in poverty. Now you have nothing and you don't know where to go and you get despondent. So that's situational poverty, and that is again the mind. It's the thought. I tell people when I failed in my business in 1984, that was the most depressing time in my life. To feel like you have failed, and now what? You have nothing. So there's two paths you can go there. You can stay there and start becoming dependent, or you can say, okay, pick yourself up, and now let's go get a job. And work has to be something that people look forward to. It's not a burden, and too many people think work is a burden, so they hate it. So now they're not going to be a good employee. So
I had an employer tell me once. Again, it's kind of an aside here, but I had an employer tell me once that in his view, work is satisfying because one of the most satisfying things in life is to accomplish something.
Accomplish something and feel worthwhile, that there's worth.
Right.
And there's worth in any job you do.
Any honest work is worth it.
Any honest work, you bet.
Yeah.
You're still serving people when you do that, and that's what it's all about. And when I call capitalism in the book, it calls Christian capitalism, because a Christian's heart is to serve and to help and to give, whereas a capitalist that greed can get in there, and that causes that thought process of capitalism is bad. So you got to combine the two, and that's hopefully what I'm trying to do here is show people, but then I want to take the problems and actually implement the solutions to show that it works.
What is it about capitalism that works?
Money. I mean, it's the society where you can generate the most revenue, the most dollars that can do the most good, which allows us to give all around the world to people. So capitalism is that it's that drive that you can do it. That anybody can be successful.
I read a statistic just this morning in a piece that I shared with listeners in the first hour of the program that capitalism has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty around the world in the last, I think it was 100 years.
I definitely believe that. I haven't seen that statistic, but it's just, if you think through it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, I'd like people to get outside of their box where it becomes personal, some of the things I say, and look at it from the outside. If you were looking in and you weren't a teacher or you weren't in government, has it worked? Has what's being done worked? And if it doesn't, you can't keep doing the same thing. The definition of insanity, to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. It won't happen. You got to change what doesn't work, not just keep spending. And I'm all for teachers. I think teachers are the most underpaid job in America.
Especially in view of its importance.
Oh, it's critical.
Yeah.
But there has to also be accountability. And that's, again, when I was teaching, I wasn't for tenure, which again will anger some people. I wasn't for tenure. I was for performance, of being able to accomplish what you're going to accomplish and then be measured based on that. Almost any job out there is that way, but for some reason teaching isn't. It's a tenured situation, which I understand it because I've been there, but I don't agree with it.
Robert Den Ouden is the author of Poverty Unchained. Do we, the people, really want to reduce poverty in America? We'll have more with Robert just ahead. Robert Den Ouden is your guest on this part of the hotline this morning. Robert's the author of a new book called Poverty Unchained. Do we, the people, really want to reduce poverty in America? Well, let's say we do. So how do we do it?
Well, it's not an easy solution. So you have to, again, the government has to reduce their trying to control the poverty initiative or the poverty narrative by, again, spending more money and pulling at people's heart and saying, well, we have to tax more because we have to help them more, so we have to give them more, or we have to pass a law that requires a certain wage, or we have to. So we the people have to take that back. There are no term limits in the federal government, which is a big mistake. We have to take away term limits. We have to make people go there to serve and then get out, which will take some of the power out of Washington. So that's one initiative, and again, you can't just wave a wand and do that. We have to determine that that's critical that we do it. But locally, again, we can do a lot more. And a lot more has to be done with, again, what I've talked about, the thought process. Teaching people to think positively, that they can pull themselves out with subsidy. They have to be subsidized up to a level. But you can't do continual subsidization. You have to make a transition. And then there has to be, I talk about choices in this book, You have to make choices. And we are in life where we are because of choices we've made and choices we continue to make. And if we want to change where we go, we have to change that choice. I like the quote, most of your viewers probably know who Yogi Berra is, but Yogi Berra said, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. And again, you start, well, okay. Well, it's true. You have to take one road or the other. You can continue down the road you're on, or you can change. Change your attitude, change your habits, you change your world. And so we have to be able to get people an opportunity to get out of their environment, to learn to think differently, to learn to work. So attitudes, habits, and effort. That word effort, which was just added to my vocabulary in the last few weeks from a person that I know, and I'll give him credit, Matt Tabor. He used to coach here in town, but he added that to my attitudes and habits equation. So again, I would love to start a community called an Opportunity Enterprise Zone that gives people the chance to move out of their environment into a safe environment where they can learn to think differently, learn how to succeed, and give them the opportunity to succeed. And that, if God's willing again and enough book sales are there, we'll make that effort. Otherwise, the money still will go to poverty initiatives that are targeted toward helping people think differently. There
are some nonprofit independent programs, and we talked a little bit during the break about one of them, transitional housing, for example.
Right.
Are these helpful?
Very helpful. Again, and before they changed from transitions to pivotal, I had met with them several times. Again, I believe their program is unbelievably good. It teaches people how to manage money, how to get a job, how to think differently. And I believe it was a 6-month program. I'm not sure that's long enough to truly change people's thought process. I'm afraid that 2 years later they can fall back into that. So that's the only thing about that. But they're a great program. In my opinion, they're one of the best in the city as far as dealing with poverty.
So we're talking about breaking a cycle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's the thing in generational poverty. It's sort of a learned behavior.
It is a very learned behavior, and that's why I talk about the schools have to get involved in this, because you plant seeds, and I hear from teachers, again, we don't have the time. Well, you can incorporate that in every lesson you teach. You don't have to do radically something different, but it's helping them change the thought. And if you impact one or two children, and they can impact one or two children, you start that seed, you plant that seed, and I firmly believe that's where it has to start. And that's a generation of changing you have to do.
Is part of the problem a lack of a sense of personal responsibility?
Wow. Yes, a lot of people have been taught that they're not personally responsible. That people are against them, and so why bother? And you owe me, and that whole philosophy of you owe me. Yeah, personal responsibility is huge because choices have to have consequences. If there are no consequences, there's no reason to change. So when I bring back again the business failure I had, that was the most valuable education. I went to Missouri Western and I thanked for my education, but that was far greater than I ever learned in 4 years of college. So you take that. I failed at that, but I learned so much to take forward to my next career and in the business that was successful. So,
Robert, we've got about 30 seconds left.
okay.
Where can people find your book?
Well, they can go to Amazon. They can go to Barnes & Noble, but I would like them to go to my website. There's some articles on there, too, called www.choiceorchance.com, and click Buy Book. And it'll take you directly to the publisher who did my book, which allows me to make more money because Amazon takes, nothing against Amazon, but they take a heck of a cut. So I have more money to use toward poverty if they'll go to my website. I'm also going to be doing a book signing at Blessings, 300 South Belt, December 1st, Saturday from 10 to 1. You can buy a book there, and you probably can't read my signature, but I'll sign the book for you. So,
Robert, I appreciate you coming in. Thanks a lot.